Islamophobia is a form of racism, but it's not just about individual prejudices or serious violence, it's also structural. Unlike most other forms of racism, Islamophobia has effectively been institutionalized by numerous governments. In the wake of the Christchurch massacre, some UK commentators have argued that the horrific racist attack in New Zealand demonstrates the need for the government's controversial counter-extremism policy, PREVENT. They claim that PREVENT can and does counter the far right, including Islamophobia. However, our new report draws the opposite conclusion. When you study the interactions between official counter-extremism policies and the Islamophobic far right, it becomes clear that far from being the solution to Islamophobic violence, policies like PREVENT are actually a big part of the problem. From their inception, counter-extremism policies like PREVENT targeted Muslim communities and were concerned with policing Muslims, not protecting them. The media has followed where governments have led. More broadly, the war on terror has not only constituted an onslaught on Muslim civil liberties and equal rights, it has also, over time, helped to reshape the far right. By treating Muslims as a suspect community, such policies are inherently discriminatory. They also empower the far right by fostering a climate of officially sanctioned Islamophobic paranoia in which counter-jihad conspiracy theories thrive. Conspiracy theories like the Great Replacement myth, popularised by French neo-fascist writer Renaud Camus, which the New Zealand killer used as the title of his manifesto. The counter-jihad movement, a strand of the far right closely related to the so-called alt-right, which particularly targets Muslims and migrants, has flourished. There is actually a symbiotic relationship between counter-jihad actors and counter-extremism actors, with both contributing to the overall problem of Islamophobia in society. Even if their language and methods are somewhat different, counter-jihad actors and counter-extremism actors often share the same underlying assumptions and act against the same targets. In fact, we highlight alarming evidence that far-right counter-jihad actors are increasingly calling themselves counter-extremists. For instance, in Germany, the Pegida movement uses logos and slogans that position itself as opposed to extremism of all sorts, whether left, right, or Islamist. The fact that counter-extremism rhetoric is so amenable to the far right tells us something important. It appears to serve as a useful cover for targeting Muslims and offers a respectable language for expressing racism, while masking the far right's own fascistic tendencies. Advocates of PREVENT are keen to emphasise that there's been a recent rise in far right referrals. However, trying to make counter-extremism policies more balanced is not the solution. Vague terms like radicalisation and extremism are deeply racialised. The state is not a neutral actor, and government complacency about the far right is not coincidental, so pursuing this approach risks simply legitimising increasingly authoritarian state powers. The far right are making inroads into governments around the world. With their hands on the levers of state power, they could do far more damage than any non-state actor. Until we acknowledge that counter-extremism policies which place blame and suspicion collectively on Muslims are a form of state racism, we will not be able to combat Islamophobia effectively. Instead, we will continue to enable the far right. Christchurch is an argument for dismantling PREVENT, not defending it, because governments cannot be both arsonist and firefighter. It's time to admit that the war on terror approach to political violence was wrong from the start. We need a war on violence and racism instead.